Connected to iPhone. Connected.
Stunning 4K.
Connected to iPhone. Connected. Connected to iPhone. Connected.
You're fucking clearly not connected to the fucking iPhone.
Galaxy Tab A2016 disconnected. Connected to iPhone and Galaxy Tab A2016.
Liberty Mutual saved us almost $800 when we switched our auto and home insurance.
Liberty Mutual Insurance.
To underscore the fact, Nazi war criminals were absolved to seek the truth lying hidden beneath the veil of distortion for actions according to their causes and motives and often hidden intentions. In the Western world, at least, they have the power that comes from political liberty, from access to information, and freedom of expression. For a privileged minority, Western democracy provides the leisure, the facilities, and the training to seek the truth lying hidden beneath the veil of distortion and misrepresentation, ideology, and class interests through which the events of current history are presented to us. And it seemed to me that epitomizes what has been your role as a public intellectual. Is that your guiding principle?
Whether it's been the role or not is for you to decide, but it's certainly been the guiding principle, something that ought to be done.
And yet at the same time, yeah. Okay. I should say we're entering the part of the program where there's going to be a lot more applause, so we'll get used to it. You have, at the same time, pointed out, at the same time as talking about what the responsibility of an intellectual is, I'll spend a great deal of time essentially castigating intellectuals, pointing out that the role of intellectuals has not been that. The role of intellectuals in our society, which I guess I first learned when I was in your class, which surprised me, has really been to be completely complicit in the lies and distortions, and in fact provide an underlying fabric and story on which those people can then use to discuss that. So.
It's unfortunate, but as a fact, I think that's a well-documented fact. Remember, intellectuals are the people who write history, so they come out looking pretty good. But you've got to take, as usual, you have to challenge things that look sort of obvious. If you think about the history of intellectuals, I think you can show that it's quite different. Actually, the term intellectual came into use in its modern sense pretty much with the Dreyfus trial in France, late 19th century. Now, today we admire and respect the Dreyfusards, Emile Zola, others who stood up for justice and so on. You look back at the time, they were a persecuted minority. The great intellectuals, the immortals of the French Academy, bitterly condemned and denounced them. And how dare you challenge the august character of the state? You, writer with no competence, how can you claim that our army is deceiving us, and so on? And in fact, Emile Zola had to flee from France. And that's pretty typical. Take almost any society you like, and you find that there's a fringe of critical dissidents, and they're usually subjected to one or another form of punishment. Depends on the nature of the society. So if it was in Eastern Europe in the last 50 years, they could be jailed, say, like Václav Havel was sent to jail. If it was in our domains in Central America, they'd have their heads blown off. We don't like to think of that comparison, but it's in fact true. The torture, murder, atrocities in our own domain, say Latin America, was much worse than what was going on in Eastern Europe in the post-Stalin era. But in both cases, there's a harsh repression of people who are critical of established power. And that goes back as far as you like. It goes back to classical Greece. So who drank the hemlock in classical Greece? It was the person who was corrupting the youth of Athens by asking hard questions that you're not supposed to ask, Socrates. Take a look at the biblical record at roughly the same period. It's a kind of oral history, but what's reconstructed from it. There were people who, by our standards, could be called intellectuals, people who condemned, criticized the king and his crimes, who gave geopolitical analysis, and they warned a warning that the acts of the kings were going to lead to disaster, who called for mercy, compassion for widows and orphans, and so on. Now, those are people who are called, the translation is prophets. It's a kind of a bad translation of an obscure Hebrew word. But in our terms, they were functioning roughly the way dissident intellectuals do. How were they treated? They were imprisoned, driven into the desert, and marginalized. There were intellectuals who were respected, flatterers at the court. Centuries later, they were called false prophets, but not at the time. And I think if you think through history, that pattern is replicated very consistently.
Let me give a quote of yours that I want you to comment. I have two quotes in that regard I want to comment on before we actually get to some of the specifics, which I want to get to. You point out that no one would be disturbed by an analysis of the political behavior of Russians, French, or Tanzanians, questioning their motives and interpreting their actions in terms of long-range interest, perhaps well concealed behind official rhetoric. But it's an article of faith that American motives are pure and not subject to analysis. Although it is nothing new in American intellectual history, or for that matter, in the general history of imperialist apologia, this innocence becomes increasingly distasteful as the power it serves grows more dominant in the world affairs and more capable, therefore, of the unconstrained viciousness that the mass media present to us each day.
I think that's a defensible statement.
Well, I hope so. You said it, but I think the point, and I remember this vividly.
And remember that this statement is the conclusion from extensive documentation.
Yeah, and substantiated. And I have many pages that I've been turning over because we don't have time to read your substantiations. But I do remember you making the statement to me many, many years ago, something that seemed obvious. And that, I guess, if you ask a 5-year-old, I think is the way you put it, they give you the answer, but you never hear, which is, would you expect that this country would behave differently than any other country, and would you expect that foreign policy wouldn't be carried out in the interests of those who are most powerful in that country, instead of in terms of altruism? But we grow up with this illusion. I didn't grow up in the United States, but it was the same in Canada. The illusion that somehow this country was somehow morally superior to all others.
Yeah, it's called American exceptionalism. There are a couple of problems with that concept. That concept is held by every great power.
Yeah.
So there's British exceptionalism, French exceptionalism, and so on. Secondly, the exceptionalism is wrong. They're all the same.
They're all the same. Now, in fact, there's some great things I'm going to skip, but I want you to also comment on this quote, because this is also in regard to your view towards certain types of intellectual activity. In short, the experts on values, spokesmen for the great religions and philosophical systems, will provide fundamental insights on moral perspectives, and the experts on social theory will provide general empirically validated propositions and general, quote-unquote, general models of conflict. From this interplay, new policies will emerge, presumably from application of the canons of the scientific method. The only debatable issue, it seems to me, is whether it's more ridiculous to turn to experts in social theory for general, well-confirmed propositions, or to the specialists in the great religions and philosophical systems for insights into fundamental human values.
I think, again, that's defensible.
So what do we do?
What we do is recognize that people like us, I suspect virtually all of us, are a privileged minority. Mm-hmm. We do have unusual freedom by comparative standards. There's plenty you can criticize about the country, but by comparative standards, it's very free. The ability of the state to repress and constrain is quite limited for anybody who has a degree of privilege. Now, it's not true if you happen to be a black kid in the slums, but for people like us, people who've gone through college, who are relatively well off, have the resources, have the time, have the access to the internet, have plenty of opportunities. I think that yields conclusions about what we ought to be doing. I mean, quite generally, privilege confers opportunity, And opportunity confers responsibility. And responsibility means dedication to challenging, questioning the verities that are imposed on us by doctrinal systems and structural arrangements that are based on hierarchy and domination. And working, not only challenging them, but doing something about it. And to the degree that you have privilege, there's more that you can do. I think that's just as simple as that. And again, I think a 5-year-old would understand it.
Well, I told you, we're in that. We're definitely in the applause phase, and I'll go on because I want. It seemed to me that you end one of that essay with the statements about related to a Russian death camp paymaster, or a German death camp paymaster who learned the Russians would hang him, and he said, "Why should they? What have I done?" And he said, you said, the question, "What have I done?" is one that we may ask ourselves as we read each day of fresh atrocities in Vietnam, as we create or mouth or tolerate the deceptions that will be used to justify the next defense of freedom. So let's talk about some of those deceptions, which I think is one of them. I would applaud because I think that's one of the most important.
I have to remember by
your point.
1966, when that was written, one of the leading specialists on Vietnam, one of the most respected ones, Bernard Fall, French military historian, Vietnam specialist, very highly respected. What he wrote at that time was that it is questionable whether Vietnam as a historic and cultural entity will survive the attack of the most powerful and brutal military machine of all time, namely us. That was right at that time. So I think those words were appropriate. And if you ask what's happened next, it's repeated over and over.
We're going to go. I want to go one by one through some of them, but at the same time, before we get there, I want to point out you've written a lot about this fact that there is a machinery that makes it extremely difficult to see what's actually happening, and that it's well organized. You've argued, and you quote Edward Bernays, who shortly before he was honored for his contributions by the American Psychological Association in 1949, wrote, "The conscious and intelligent manipulation of the organized habits and opinions of the masses is an important element in a democratic society." He went on, "There's a trifling fraction of the population who understand the mental processes and social patterns of the masses and are therefore in a position to pull the wires which control the public mind. This process of engineering consent is the very essence of the democratic process," he put.
That's Edward Bernays, and it's important to remember who he was. He's one of the founders of the public relations industry. His first great book was called, in the 1920s, was called Propaganda. In those days, the term propaganda was used for persuasion, basically. It got a kind of bad connotation during the 30s and the 40s, so we now only use it for the propaganda of others, not for our own. But he was the founder of the public relations industry. He's a very respected Wilson, Roosevelt, Kennedy liberal, hero in Cambridge, where I live. His first great achievement, what really propelled him to fame, was getting women to smoke. In the 1920s, women didn't smoke. He was hired by one of the tobacco companies, and he arranged things like having models walk down Fifth Avenue smoking, and that's the modern women, that's liberating, and so on. How many tens of millions of women he killed, we don't know, but plenty of them. One of his other great achievements in 1954 was to create in the country the fear that unless we defend ourselves from communism in Guatemala, we're going to be destroyed. That laid the basis for overthrowing Guatemalan democracy, brief experiment in democracy, imposing a vicious, brutal dictatorship, which pretty much lasts till today, destroying the country, hundreds of thousands are killed, and so on. Those are the achievements of propaganda for which he's respected. Another point that should be made is that what he was saying is pretty much characteristic of liberal intellectual opinion about the nature of democracy.
Let me go on from that. In fact, here's I don't know if he's considered a liberal intellectual here, the professor of science of government at Harvard, Samuel Huntington, who you quote, the architects of power in the United States must create a force that can be felt but not seen. Power remains strong when it remains in the dark. Exposed to the sunlight, it begins to evaporate. And then he said, of the Reagan years, that you have to sell intervention and other military action in such a way as to create the misimpression that it is the Soviet Union that you're fighting. So this is discussed in the open.
That's 1981,
yeah.
And he should be respected for his honesty. But that's pretty much correct.
In fact, the other person that amazed me that you often talk about should be respected for his honesty is another despicable human being, Henry Kissinger. And I wonder whether you might want to comment on that.
Well,
I listened to Alan Watt Chill Step. Have you ever heard that? Alan Watt Chill Step? All I had to do was type in AL, and then that's the first thing that pops up because I listen to it so much. Yeah, Alan Watt Chill Step. Yeah, I listened to his lectures like way back in the day, and then I came across the Chill Step shit, and I was like, yo, that's crazy. So I got one of my homies, he's a DJ, and he likes mixing music, so I have him mixing a couple of other lectures together with Chill Step beats. I might actually get him to blend some Noam Chomsky with some Chill Step.
Kissinger has some really remarkable lines, and what's important about them is not just that he produced them and that they led to actions implementing them, but that there's no reaction to it among the intellectual classes. So, for example, at one point in must be 1971, he calmly transmitted orders from probably half-drunk Richard Nixon to the U.S. Army and Air Force, referring to Cambodia, and the orders were anything that flies against anything that moves in rural Cambodia. It's pretty hard to find in the archival record any statement advocating genocide at that level of clarity and explicitness. And those orders were careful.
Yeah, probably my favorite speaker is Dr. Amos Wilson. I have several of his books, and he has like tons of lectures from the late 80s and like early mid 90s. And so I told my homeboy, I was like, yo, I gave him one of Amos Wilson's lectures, and I was like, yo, splice this up into some Chill Step. This shit is gonna be tight. So he says he's working on it. Like, I've never ever thought of that concept. It's so smooth to listen to. You get good vibes with the music, and then you listen to a really intelligent person just give you some life philosophy, some lessons, just dropping jewels on you. That shit is sweet, yo.
Carried out with horrendous effect. Now, all of this appeared in the New York Times. When the Nixon tapes were exposed, there was an article about what was in them, mostly about gossip. But if you look closely, one of the things in the revelation was this order. There was no reaction to it. That's the part that's significant that we ought to think about.
Well, in fact, that's not the first time, I think, that you would argue that the United States was involved in genocide. And in fact, you quote, you begin, and I want to sort of begin, I want to list some of the things you've discussed, and maybe we debate a few of them, all the way up to the issue that many people are expecting us to talk about at some point today, which is in the Middle East. You talk about the Nuremberg trials, and you say the operative definition of crime is crime that you carried out, but we did not. To underscore the fact, Nazi war criminals were absolved if the defense could show that their U.S. counterparts carried out the same crimes. So therefore, massive bombing and destructions of cities or civilian populations is not considered genocide because the United States did it.
And in fact, that was explicit. If you read, say, Telford Taylor, chief prosecutor, he says, well, wouldn't make sense to charge the Nazis with the crime of bombing of heavy urban concentrations because we did it even more than they did. So how can it be a crime? You know, in fact, and you have to recall that of all the tribunal,
the United States did it.
What the fuck did they just say? Yo, ow, what's up, yo?
The operative definition of crime is crime that you carried out, but we did not. To underscore the fact, Nazi war criminals were absolved if the defense could show that their U.S. counterparts carried out the same crimes. So therefore, massive bombing and destructions of cities or civilian populations is not considered genocide because the United States did it.
And in fact, that was explicit. If you read, say, Telford Taylor, chief prosecutor, he says, well, wouldn't make sense to charge the Nazis with the crime of bombing of heavy urban concentrations because we did it even more than they did. So how can it be a crime? You know, in fact, and you have to recall that of all the tribunals, that Nuremberg is the one that deserves most respect. The others are much worse. But that was the criterion for war crimes at Nuremberg. If they did it and we didn't, it's a war crime.
So you want to list some of the major times that we've been involved in genocide, perhaps from going from Florida, Nicaragua, El Salvador, maybe have some, just remind people, especially the young people in the audience?
Well, you know, again, that's something all of us ought to know. Why are we here? What happened to the indigenous population? Are they around?
Black people built the whole Egyptian civilization. Well, if you go there now, there's no black people there. Duh. Just like he said, who was here on this continent first? Okay, do you see these people around anymore? No, that's what happens when motherfucking invaders come in. But it's weird, like, I talk about these same, and this is my first time listening to this lecture. I started it yesterday. I'm trying to finish it up today. But it's weird as fuck, like, I talk about this shit all the time, but it sounds so bad coming from a black person. But it's known facts, it's history. But Noam Chomsky can say this shit, and it's like, yeah, you're right, Noam. You're so right. It's crazy, yo. It's just a more recent conversation from Chomsky, and I was like, okay, I've never heard it. So the title of it is Noam Chomsky in Conversation with Lawrence Krauss. 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 So, like I said, I've listened to tons of everybody, you know what I'm saying? Eric Von Daniken, David Icke, motherfucking Chomsky. What's the guy from the alt-right dude? Spencer. I've even listened to tons of his shit. You know what I'm saying? I just like listening to these dudes. Alan Watts, like, you know what I'm saying? To always get that other perspective. Damn, what's my other man name too? I listen to a lot, yo. Oh, there's another dude. His name is, they two Alan Watts. Well, one of them is Watts with an S, and the other one is just Watt. Alan Watt. He from Canada, yo. A lot of people don't really know about that dude, but that motherfucker be on some other shit too, yo. Yeah, but Chomsky been doing this shit for a long time. A lot of people don't like listening and shit like this, but yo, you already, yo, that shit is crazy, bruh. And so the shit that I be on the information shit, like, I use my social media as a tool, like, legit as a tool. I don't be on, like, Facebook and all that shit with all that fucking dumb shit. You know, so I just don't do that shit. My Facebook is mostly informative shit, yo, like 99.9% informative shit. And goddamn, like, so over a month ago, I started hearing this story, yo, like, motherfuckers being sold. But you know how shit be, man. You gotta really, like, look into that shit, so I kind of let it fly by, like, the first 2 times. I'm like, get the fuck out of here. But the third time, I started reading into that shit. I was like, yo, what the fuck? And then now, like, CNN, like, they got this fucking, look, I'll straight up show you my Facebook, yo. My Facebook is like hood news. Alright, so my last post was my live stream. When you realize the Lord of the Rings had 6 movies with no black actors or actresses. But white people mad at the Black Panther movie cast for being too black. Yo, then I dropped this video right here. This dude, man, that shit was tight. Then this other story right here. A cop's son shoots and kills unarmed man in broad daylight on video and the police let him go. I had to read that story. That shit was crazy. Roy Moore claims giving black voting rights has created a problem for this country. I had to read that article. That shit crazy. And they got a little piece of audio from that shit too, yo. And then right here, migrants being sold as slaves in Libya. Like, I just posted that because, like I say, I don't be wanting to, like, jump to conclusions and shit. So I read a couple articles on it, and then this was actually a CNN post. And I was like, yo, let me share this shit real quick so everybody else can get up on it too. And then a bunch of my live streams. On my days off, that's really all that goes up there is live streams. Oh man, that drone technology. 2 facts you don't know about women. Man, the article about my man Mugabe, that motherfucker resigned. That was a couple weeks ago. Something else in South Africa talking about making women take birth control. They trying to sterilize the Africans. Oh, Terrence McKenna? Yeah, I heard about that. Why? Army, why what? Why are they selling people? It's called slavery. Yeah. It's called slavery, bro. Oh, you mean why? Why are people being sold?
Are they around?
Just remind people, especially the young people in the audience.
Well, you know, again, that's something all of us ought to know. Why are we here? What happened to the indigenous population? Are they around? Okay. I mean, that answers the question. And in fact, the perpetrators were quite aware of it. If you read the Founding Fathers, you know, General Henry Knox, or on and on, they were well aware that what they were doing was exterminating the indigenous populations. We're a settler colonial society. And we're here because the indigenous population isn't here. Okay, pick the word you like, but that's a fact. A parallel fact is that to an extent that is only beginning to be revealed by scholarship very recently. Our wealth, privilege, progress is based very heavily on a century of vicious slave labor camps where productivity, namely what are called slave plantations, where productivity actually increased very rapidly, more rapidly than in manufacturing, without any technological progress other than more intensive use of the bullwhip and the pistol. That's the basis for our wealth. Cotton production was set off the Industrial Revolution, and it didn't just enrich the slave owners. It created the manufacturing economy in the Northeast. Mills with a big innovation in manufacture created the modern financial system. Same in England. That's how the English Industrial Revolution took off. So based on
Gaddafi wasn't evil, bro. You know what I'm saying? Gaddafi, I mean, once again, Noam Chomsky is a white man trying to tell you about the schism in Western ideology and Western thinking. Because you think somebody is horrible and is a terrible man, you still have to look at from a different cultural standpoint. You know what I'm saying? You can call him all the names you want, but Gaddafi was about to bring out that dinar the same way China about to bring out the what is it, the yuan or damn. China got their cryptocurrency. Well, motherfucking first they had to get Saddam out the way because he was such an evil man. But Saddam wasn't playing around with that oil no more. He said, "Give me gold for my oil. You want my oil? You want my resources? Give me gold. I don't want your fucking fiat currency. I don't want your paper debt. You know what I'm saying? I don't want that shit." They knocked his ass off. Then Gaddafi said, "Oh well, we about to come out with the gold dinar. I got motherfucking 35 million whatever tons of gold and almost that amount in silver. I'm about to make a new currency. You want my shit? You give me gold." They knocked his ass off, but now he's some evil ass man. You know what I'm saying? But now China about to do this shit, and China about to put out a new fucking oil currency. But you just can't go knock China off because there's too many of them motherfuckers. You know what I'm saying? You just can't do that shit to China. That shit gonna be crazy. And everybody else used chemical weapons too, man. Who came up with chemical weapons? Who invented that shit? That's the only thing I say, man. Anytime you talk about any kind of weapon, who invented it? Who came up with it? Where did it come from? How did Saddam was a ally for a while. We gave Saddam fucking nukes and chemical weapons. Reagan gave him that shit. It's the same way we armed the Mujahideen. Oh, they're freedom fighters. But then, then we call them terrorists. It's weird as shit, yo. We make our own enemies over and over and over. And now it's getting to the point where we can't even make enemies anymore. So we make up like shit. Now it's this war on terror. It's the weirdest. It's a war on an ideology, an intangible enemy that can be anywhere or anybody creeping behind any door, lurking. It's weird as shit. We done took over every fucking thing. That's what I'm saying, man. Oh, he used chemical weapons. Yeah, well, how did he get them? You know what I'm saying? All that shit is a ploy. It's a setup. It's strategic moves by the military industrial complex to keep this war machine going. They got to keep the war machine going, yo. Got to. Can you imagine a world with no wars? Man, so much industry would. Most industry is based on wars. Most of our technology comes from military shit, yo. Bruh. Foreign policies confuse the shit out of me. You know what I'm saying? To the point where it almost seems elementary, but I don't know. Nobody can really implement shit, yo.
Horrendous slave labor, which in fact was replicated in later years, and extermination of the indigenous population. But these are pretty serious things.
Well, it seems to me they're serious, but what's more obscene? Fine. What's more obscene, and I think you've argued this, because I've learned it from you, is not the act of doing it, is the fact that we forget about it, the fact that we don't talk about it, and the fact that we don't talk about Nicaragua, as you put it, was reduced to a second poorest country in the hemisphere, with 60% of children under 2 afflicted with anemia and severe malnutrition. And if it was comparable in our country, it would have been about 2.5 million dead individuals if you ramped up to our country. The fact that in El Salvador, people didn't talk about the brutal murders of in that case the Catholic Jesuit priests,
leading Latin American intellectual,
and that those deaths weren't talked about. If the responsibility of intellectuals is to expose lies and truth, we need to keep talking about it.
Exactly, and it goes on.
Now, in that regard, let's
come to today.
Yeah, I was going to say, let's come to today.
I mean, we're deeply concerned about the rise of the so-called Islamic State, which is a monstrous development, no doubt about it. Where did it come from? Was it there 20 years ago? I mean, it was largely created by our hitting a vulnerable society with a sledgehammer, imposing, namely the invasion of Iraq, imposing sectarian divisions that barely existed, horrible atrocities. Out of this came extreme violence, sectarian conflict, tearing Iraq to shreds, spreading throughout the region, and an extremist fringe of this is now taking over a good bit of Iraq and Syria, and we're puzzled about how to deal with it. It didn't come from nowhere. You know, actions have consequences.
Actions have consequences. Yeah, I told you where you're going. But I want to. Actions have consequences, and in fact, there was a big issue. There seemed to be very little debate about whether forget the invasion of Iraq, but our invasion of Afghanistan was a just war, and you put it in an interesting way, I think, which puts it in perspective, because it's the questions of just war. Once the issue of universality arises, if the U.S. is unquestionably authorized to bomb another country, to compel its leaders to turn over someone it suspects of involvement in a terrorist act, then, a fortiori, Cuba, Nicaragua, and a host of others are entitled to bomb the U.S. because there's no doubt of its involvement in terrorist activities against them.
I mean, it's kind of suppressed because now there's a story that we invaded Afghanistan to overthrow the Taliban and bring freedom and democracy and so on. But go back to what actually happened. It's not ancient history. You don't have to go to secret records. It's all public. The initial bombing of Afghanistan was announced by President Bush as a punishment to the Taliban for refusing to turn over to us someone who we suspected of terrorism. Now, actually, they requested evidence No, you don't. We don't deal with people like you by presenting evidence. We tell you turn them over, turn them over. They actually made some gestures. We don't know how serious they were to set up extradition proceedings, independent trials, and so on. We don't want to hear anything about that. We ordered you to turn them over. You don't do it, we bomb you. Period. That's what happened October 7th. Look it up.
Okay, I was going to talk about terrorism, but we're running short.
Gaddafi ain't greedy. Gaddafi was about to feed his people, man. Gaddafi was giving, man. Yo, hey, and he was a general, right? That motherfucker was a general. Man, that motherfucker was, man, Libya was on the come up, man. You know what I'm saying? You about to bring in a new currency, free education, free healthcare. You get married, the state give you motherfucking, money for housing and everything, yo. Man, Libya is about to be the place. Oh, we can't have that shit going on. This fucking this African think he about to come up because he got gold. All right, snuff his ass out. Yo. Yeah, and how he dressed, yeah, yo, that motherfucker was pimped out, yo. Gaddafi threw that shit on. The shades, had the big shades on. Yo. His parents died homeless. Word. I don't know.
Time, in fact, we've gone over, but that's...
And you know how many motherfucking countries are practice Islam? Yo, and then he was like, yo, if you want to go to school and study something and you can't find a school in Libya, man, we'll give you a charter to go to an American school or wherever you want to go. If you got to go to the motherfucking university in England somewhere, we gonna get you there. You gonna get that education, then you gonna bring that shit back to our country and help our country out, yo. Exactly, yo. That everything looks bad when somebody trying to come up for themselves without, having to be a step stool for somebody else. That looks bad, you know what I'm saying? Because motherfucker got to take shit by force and do shit by charge, you know what I'm saying? That's how everybody else get good positions. You just don't sit back. Motherfucker got to make shit happen. You got to shuck and jive. You got to pull a couple strings, you know what I'm saying? Holler at a few people because you may know somebody who knows somebody. You know what I'm saying? Get everything organized. You can just get a little blood on your hands, you know what I'm saying? Here and there. But it's all, for the better good.
It's okay. There are two issues that I want to talk about. The first one is Netanyahu. What the hell's going on?
Not Benjamin. They about to talk about Benjamin.
Actually, a number of my Israeli friends, at the fringe of the dissident community, there are people like Amir Haas, Gidon Levy, and others, are actually praising the election of Netanyahu. Says it takes the veil away from the common policies. And there's some truth to that, I think. But there's more to it. We should look a little bit about the history. That Netanyahu is now being attacked in the United States because in a campaign speech, he said there won't be a Palestinian state in my lifetime. Well, in 2009, his party, Likud, the governing party, had an electoral program. official program. What did it say? It said there cannot be any self-determination for Palestinians in the land of Israel. That means Jordan to the sea. The same comment. In fact, go back to 1996, Netanyahu's first electoral victory. He was elected prime minister in 1996. The preceding prime minister, Shimon Peres, left office announcing publicly there will never be a Palestinian state. When Netanyahu came in, his Minister of Information was asked, will your government tolerate a Palestinian state? The answer's worth reading. He said, look, we're going to leave certain areas that we don't want for the Palestinians. They can stay there. And if they want to call it a state, it's okay. Or they can call it fried chicken. That's the attitude towards Palestinian rights. And incidentally, that's pretty much across the board. It's Netanyahu does it in a manner that may be kind of rude and offensive, but the attitudes of the rest of the mainstream spectrum are not that different. And it happens because we're supporting it. That's exactly it. The problem is right here.
Jews got to have a promised land, holy land.
There may be more questions, Israel, so I'm going to leave that. But I think I was surprised by a statement you made in 2004 about Syria. About Syria, actually. You argued, in fact, that it was really inappropriate to have Syria on the list of states sponsoring terrorism, that we shouldn't have them, that they were an ally, and that and it hadn't been implicated in sponsoring terrorism for many years, been highly cooperative in providing intelligence on radical Islamic groups. Has your view changed?
Well, Syria is pretty much self-destructed since then. So sure, it's no longer an ally providing information about jihadi terrorism. What's happened in Syria is a horrendous development in which the society is just collapsing into total catastrophe. It may never recover.
Yeah, because they got bombed the shit. They got bombed the fucking hell and back. And then they're wondering
with a few thoughts of the future, and also a subject that I can't help bring up given your writing. George Bush reportedly proclaimed that God told me to strike at Al-Qaeda, and I struck them. And then he instructed me to strike at Saddam, which I did. And then you wrote, and now I am determined to solve the problem of the Middle East, he said. Also, and then your words, also at the command of the Lord of hosts, the war god, whom we are instructed by the Holy Book to worship above all other gods. And as I mentioned, the elite press dutifully refers to his messianic mission to solve the problem of the Middle East, in fact, the world, following, quote, our responsibility to history to rid the world of evil. The early English colonists in North America were following the word of the Lord as they slaughtered the Amalekites, in the new Israel that they were liberating from the native blight. Those who followed them, also Bible-waving, God-fearing Christians, did their religious duty by conquering and possessing the Promised Land, ridding it of millions of Canaanites, and proceeding to war against the Papists in Florida, Mexico, and California. Now,
it's sustainable again, I'm afraid.
Yes, but the question I'm going to ask you may not be the one you think. So, you once told me in an email when I talked about my concerns about religion.
My concerns about religion.
It's that you rightly. Then this is a profoundly important thing. You don't care what people believe; it's what they do that counts. But beliefs influence actions, and it seems to me, and I want to hear your comment, that if you really talk about, if we go back to your argument for the responsibility of intellectuals, which is to expose lies, is it not therefore our responsibility to expose religious lies?
Sure. If, say, a third of the American population believes that the world was created a couple of thousand years ago, exactly as it is today, yes, it is our responsibility to expose that lie and to tell the truth. On the other hand, if, say I'm thinking of a particular person, but could give many examples, if a Peruvian peasant who immigrated to the United States 30 years ago and has managed to create a decent life for herself under pretty awful conditions, is an evangelical Christian who has a prayer group every evening that goes to visit the sick and pray with them, I'm not going to read her a lesson in epistemology.
Okay. Well, I couldn't agree with you more. It's our duty to expose lies when they influence behavior, and especially state behavior in a bad way. And I think that, although you didn't intend it, all those quotes, of course, and many wars are justified by religious arguments. Although one could argue if there wasn't God, one would justify them.
But we should also remember that there's a secular religion, which is even more devastating, and that's things like the concept of American exceptionalism. That's a secular religion.
Now, to conclude, to get to the end before, so we give people a chance to go to the bathroom, us among others. There's an urgency that you ended in a recent piece you wrote just last year, and two pieces, that basically begin by saying there's nothing particularly novel about any of this, apart from one aspect. The means of destruction that have now been developed are by now so awesome, and the risks of deploying and using them so enormous, that a rational Martian observer would not rank the prospects for survival of this curious species very high, as long as contempt for elementary moral truisms remains so deeply entrenched among educated elites. And you talked about, and you began to talk about the issue of climate change, and our future, in a piece called Human Intelligence in the Environment. And you pointed out an interesting debate between Carl Sagan and Ernst Mayr about whether we'd find life elsewhere in the universe, which is an issue that's closer to my own activities. And Mayr pointed out that
bricks might not be all the way straight.
Great American biologist to be to know, absolutely. That if you think about the longevity of species, the smaller the species, the ones that can reproduce more quickly are the more robust. And as you become larger and larger, the mammals essentially are less robust. And that if you think of life as a lethal mutation,
not life,
intelligent life as a lethal mutation, that he argued you wouldn't expect it. It's been around for about 100,000 years, and you wouldn't expect it to survive much longer.
He says that the average life of species is roughly 100,000 years.
Yeah, roughly one extermination of a species extinct. We just had a meeting on extinctions, and we quoted that data on this stage once every 100,000 years. So we argued that, in fact, humans have this potential to exterminate ourselves, and you're particularly worried about the fact that climate change is a severe issue, but you see, again, the same kind of effort to obfuscate the issue by American power elites for climate change that you saw for American military intervention. So I wanted to ask you to comment on that a little bit.
Well, anyone who isn't living under a rock knows that we're heading for a precipice. The human effect on the environment, climate change, anthropogenic climate change, is enormous. And it's...
Gonna go on Fox News. What the hell? That's crazy. But I don't know. I don't think climate change is due to human activity. I mean, we are definitely polluting the planet, but the ice caps and all that shit, I don't think like this massive greenhouse effect that they're talking about is actually human. It's coming from human actions. You gotta listen to information on both sides of that shit, yo. And it's just like, it's weird, yo. There's been several ice ages. Smog is proof? Yeah, but there's been several ice ages before modern man or any kind of major industrial toxification of the ozone layer. Yeah, cities do turn air toxic. But when you look at the relationship between the Earth and our sun, which gives all the heat to our planet, we get all the heat to the planet from the sun, right? And we still are able to have ice ages because the sun cools sometimes, and the sun itself actually goes through different phases. And we're at a phase where the fucking sun is just heating up again. And so technically having ice caps means we are still coming out of the ice age. And there may be a time where the ice caps are, way smaller than they are now. So the fuck what? And then in another fucking couple thousand years or something, probably go through a cold spurt or with the sun, and the fucking ice caps will start growing back again. You do AI. Yep, thanks. But once again, I think this gradual warming period that we've been experiencing over the past 40 years is natural. It's sun activity. The sun is heating up. It's not, once again, it's not coming from fucking deforestation or smogs in cities. Once again, listening to some lectures on population reduction and shit, everybody on the planet can fit in fucking France. You know what I'm saying? There's not that many of us, really, and most of our oxygen comes from blue-green algae in our oceans, and not from our trees. Yeah, but a new ice age would mean the planet would have to be cooling off. And, these climate change people are saying that the planet is heating up. How much more of this got? Oh man, there's
the effect is already being felt, too, guys. And it will be, if it continues the way it's going, it'll be very severe in a short period of time, maybe our grandchildren. So what are we doing? Well, for example, open any business page in the newspapers. Euphoria about 100 years of energy independence, about the great new production techniques that are increasing the use of fossil fuels, about how the energy corporations there happens to be a slight oil glut at the moment, but the energy corporations are poised so that if the glut declines, they'll be able quickly to move with new technology and to producing more and more fossil fuels that is driving us toward the precipice. We'll be the Saudi Arabia of the 21st century, meanwhile destroying the prospects for the lives of our grandchildren. Almost any...
But see what I don't get that. More production for oil when most oil is and petrol is used for transportation. I mean, we make a lot of products with petroleum, but we're moving away from gas. We're actually at the cusp of this fucking electrical switch over with our automobiles. So fighting for oil, that's why everybody's really fighting for the control of the oil now, because they know this shit is about to end. Yo, oil ain't gonna be king much longer, yo. And they only got maybe a half a century before different forms of electric fucking engines and shit just start to take over. Really?
Issue of a newspaper or a journal has articles like that.
But you argue that that's an imperative of capitalism in some sense, that the idea to consider externalities, that economists consider the flow of money, but not...
There's a fucking a shopping center that's literally like 4 miles from here, like right down the road. There's a shopping center and there's a Tesla fueling station. Like, I'm not from this area, so when I moved here, you just go up there, go shopping, go to restaurants, and it's right by the fucking Longhorn Steakhouse. That's my shit. I go get them fucking, those Muellers. Oh man, them drinks are shit, yo. But right there by the fucking Longhorn, there's like 6 fucking big ass Tesla Jones, and every time you go there, there's at least 2 or 3 cars getting charged. Motherfuckers go charge their car, go shopping or have lunch or whatever. That shit is the future. That shit is gonna be everywhere, yo. And I seen another one like in another, like the other town over, probably like 12 miles from here. One of their little shopping centers got a Tesla charger station. Well, I don't know. Those shits, what I think how they're gonna do it is, man, like, storage cells. It's just like storage cells underground. You don't really gotta rewire. That shit ain't gonna be wired into no substation nowhere, nothing like that, yo. These Tesla shits, they got these big ass fucking batteries that they bury underneath the fucking charger, and that shit is like solar powered or some shit like that, yo. Big ass stands and this shit solar powered. The batteries charge up, cars pull up and they charge from the battery underground, yo. Yeah, Tesla not for the poor people, man. Nah, Tesla ain't looking out for us. Not right now. You know what I'm saying? You might have to get a used Tesla. You know, in like 2-3 years, when they put out that new fully self-driving model, and then the old model, you grab one of them shit up with a couple, like 70, 80,000 miles. You get that shit for like 30 stacks. So I was looking on Car Gurus the other day, man. I seen the motherfucking 09 Bentley with $32,000. I was, man, I'm about to go buy me a Bentley just now. I was like, man, let me stop playing around, fooling myself. As soon as the motherfucking brake pad go out of that shit, I can't afford this shit, man. Brake pad, $700. Good Lord.
But not the other impacts on human life, and those aspects are not included in costs. And in some sense, you argue that I think that that's an inevitable consequence of what you call the real existing capitalist democracy. And there's two quotes I want to end with. You say, within the real existing capitalist democracy, which you call RECT, R-E-C-D, RECT, it is of extreme importance that we become the stupid nation, not misled by science and rationality, in the interests of the short-term gains of the master of the economy and political system. Damn the consequences. Then the last statement, which I think takes us back to the very beginning, which is I want to end with it, is this question of human nature. Is this an inevitable consequence of human nature? You say, there is something about us, our intelligence, that we're capable of acting in ways that are rational within a narrow framework, but are irrational in terms of other long-term goals. Do you see any optimism?
Well, I think we have to make a distinction here between individual rationality and institutional rationality. Individual stupidity and institutional stupidity.
Don't forget, there's a difference between individual racism and institutional racism.
For example, recently at Davos, there was a poll of CEOs when they were asked to rank risks. I think they had 19 risks that they thought were serious. Climate change was not among them. The top risk was regulation, the one possibility of eliminating the disaster. Now that's institutional stupidity. If you would ask those individuals, what do you think about climate change? They'd probably say, I'm contributing to the Sierra Club. As individuals, they may be perfectly rational and sensible, but in their institutional role, there are certain requirements that they must meet. If you're the CEO of, say, ExxonMobil, and you're not trying to maximize the use of fossil fuels, you're out, and somebody else is in, because that's the nature of the institution. In these kind of quasi-market systems in which we live, transactions ignore externalities. Like if I sell you a car, we make a deal for ourselves, we don't care about the effect on them. And there's an effect, more pollution, more traffic jams, and so on, and it adds up. In the case of extraction of fossil fuels, the externality happens to be survival of your grandchildren. But in the institutional framework,
Tesla,
that's not considered.
all right. I read the last comment, but yeah,
like an economics test.
Tesla was the fucking
but
man,
that's
yo.
Institutional.
Yeah, and there's still like fucking an hour left on this shit, yo. This is a long ass conversation. I may finish this tonight myself and try to find something else to listen to tomorrow, guys. But yeah. For most people already know this guy, but this is Noam Chomsky. If you do want to finish this talk, it's Noam Chomsky in conversation with Lawrence Krauss. They're talking about a lot of different topics, so it's really good, really interesting. A lot of meat on the bones. Once again, like most most talks, conversations, lectures, debates, interviews that I listen to, I don't agree with the speaker 100%, but that doesn't matter. You don't always have to agree 100% to listen to someone else's point of view, yo. Just trying to turn some of this stuff off. About to get up out of here, man. All right, speaker. It's on. I think my girlfriend made a homemade pizza for dinner. Ooh, ain't nothing like them homemade pizzas. Ooh, some turkey pepperoni and green olives, little bit of red onions and some garlic salt on a thin crust.
with some mozzarella and a little bit of fat. Damn, I should have been a singer, man. I don't know what was wrong with me, man. I could have just hit the mic in the booth like, woo, 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 woo. And can you woo, woo, woo? Man, I know I can sing, man. Yeah, appreciate y'all guys chilling with me. Y'all know how I do, man. When y'all catch me in the evening like this, y'all already know I've been at work all day. I normally like to be here early, but I made an hour. Yeah, at least, you know, after work I try to come here for an hour, yeah, and work on a little something. I give a whole day to the man. I gotta give myself an hour. Damn. I gotta figure out how to give myself a whole day and get a man 1 hour. Then I'm on top. Top dog. Top bone. I clean these brushes out. Denmark. Thomas. What's good, bro? Thomas from Denmark. Yeah, if this is your first time in the stream, yo, subscribe to the channel. It ain't nothing but art and education. You know what I'm saying? Follow me on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. Buzz. And paintings by the Prince. Yo, my name is really Prince, yo. Check that shit, son. Yeah, that's crazy, right? My name is Prince. Yeah, follow all my shit, yo. Paintings by the Prince. It's so easy to remember. I make paintings. My name Prince. Paintings by the Prince. That nigga make it woo woo woo. Sick. Come on, camera. Damn, PlayStation, you be acting funny when people be around, man. When I get cut, man, PlayStation camera be acting all weird and shit. Acting all shy, like you just can't turn this way. When I'm trying to woo woo woo. And clean up my brush. Tomorrow might be a beat night. And listen to some beats and freestyle. Y'all gonna come in here and freestyle with me? Ooh, shit. Freestyle cipher. I might say that for Friday. You know how they used to do back in the day, Freestyle Fridays? Y'all ain't never do that? On the radio, on the local radio, man, Freestyle Fridays? You can call into the radio station, but you couldn't curse. As soon as you say one curse word, you get eliminated. Then see who can be the freestyle champ. Oh man, I don't know about that shit, man. Calling into the radio. Motherfuckers put everything on SoundCloud now. Shit. It's time to throw this shirt away and grab another shirt. Oh, there's a little clean patch. Ooh. Clean up my brushes. Paint Mike Tyson? No. So what? Paint Mike? Oh man. Oh yeah, if y'all on my Instagram, yo, I do have an art show coming up Friday. This Friday. What's today? Today's Tuesday? Shit, I gotta go take the fucking trash out. It's Tuesday? Damn it. Alright, yeah, so Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, in 3 days. Y'all can catch me at the art gallery at, I don't know, like 6:30 p.m. I'll stroll up in the gallery, check out some art, and see which one of my pieces they hung in the gallery. I submitted 3 pieces. They probably only hung one of them. I'm not sure which one it is yet, so it's going to be a surprise even to me. So it's going to be fucking cool. I'm always excited when I have gallery shows. No, my man never sent me a fucking picture. The other guy never sent me a picture.
too. Like, he sent me one message. I told him he won. I don't know. It was so hard to even give out the last challenge picture. I forgot who won the last one. Alex. My man Alex. Yeah, you gotta respond, yo. You win the challenge and then don't respond. It's like, you ain't want the damn prize. I ain't even get started on that. And then he hit me up on Instagram, and I guess he just started an Instagram account just for that challenge because he has no pictures, no posts, no follows, no nothing. So I guess he can't woo. Do. All right, guys, I'm definitely about to get out of here. Just making sure everything is off. Boom. Once again, man, you guys are the fucking shit for hanging out with your boy, keep me company, man. Cause it be so quiet in the studio. It's like, no, it don't. Cause I be in this shit bumping and listening to Chomsky. Yo, peace. Till next time.